Good afternoon. Welcome to the Big Dam. This is your boy Bobby Hill. Welcome y'all here this Friday. Hope y'all having a good day. Hoping I always say, hope you one step closer to your dreams and your goals. Whether they long term, short term. Hope you one step closer to them, as long as they're positive. As I always say, I like to give a shout out to my lovely wife, Sandra Hill. She's my backbone. Reason why I'm doing this. She's a little. She they got a job. It's a little physical. She's a little banged up a little bit. So having to help her out. Being like I said, it's not always 50-50. It's times 70-30, 60-40. You know, 80-20. It be like that sometimes. So we sit here lean on each other. You know, and she lean on me, I lean on her. And that's how we get it done. Times though she feeling down, I have to give her words of encouragement. And she do the same thing for me. Life sometimes can beat you up, and sometimes you just need some little bit of encouragement, just a little bit of words, a little bit of words. You don't need a lot. You don't need. It's all about sometimes all about the gifts that you give and all of this, and how you can perform and do certain things to certain people, certain things to the body parts. It's not about that sometimes. Sometimes it's about it's giving words of encouragement. Sometimes being able to just communicate. Get them out of that slump. Get them out of that funk. Just a little bit of encouragement. Baby, I'm here to support you. I love you. I'm here. I'm your rock. You my rock. Sometimes that's all you need. So and it's good though. As you see, I'm an African American. My wife is Mexican. So and you would think that it would be like it would have been like hard as far as different cultures and like two different cultures coming together. And I tell my wife this all the time, and they're gonna talk about it. They tell them, man, I might talk about it, but they gonna do it. Talking about the you know, in certain areas. I ain't say in all places, but I've seen it a lot in my life where there's been like a divide or a rift between the black community and the Mexican community. Like yeah, let's see, like I really didn't pay attention to it till I was working at a distribution warehouse, and I talked to a guy. Actually, he was a Mexican. He was Puerto Rican. Shout out to a man Christian Cole and his brother. I forgot his brother's name, but both of them they brothers. Even my man, he helped me when I was working. This company called Dale Hayes America. They had bought out this grocery chain line called Food Line, and they had a distribution center in Dunn, North Carolina, and worked over there. And you know, Chris, and they call him Chris Core. He told me that about he was Puerto Rican, but he was cool. He was cool. We talked all the time. And he was telling me about how Mexican men didn't like black men. How it was always a problem and stuff. And I thought about it. Growing up, we didn't have, like I said, North Carolina in Clinton, North Carolina. It was only basically three main. It was blacks, it was the whites, and it was the Native Americans. So, and then there was a few like Hispanics, but they were like I said, we had migrant workers. We had it's a lot of farm areas, a lot of farms in areas. So they had people working there, a lot of migrant workers. So, and they had their own community. They didn't mingle with outside their community. They lived, a lot of them lived where they worked at. And when they all went, they wouldn't you wouldn't see like random a random migrant worker out here shopping or whatever. They were always getting together in a group, and like mostly on a Sunday. I don't know if they still do it. I know Sundays in Clinton and Walmart was like a holiday because they always come bus loads and buy everything they need for the week and go, back to where they stay. And that was the experience I always had of Mexicans, Mexican, Hispanics, people like in that in the area of Clinton, North Carolina. I know places with larger populations. I know things are probably different, but I wasn't over there. I can just speak for that for Clinton. And I know probably one of the reasons that there was a divide in Clinton, and this is something that I'm not saying, like I said, I don't go out here and say name. I don't say nothing. I just say as I talk in general. But one thing that will happen that I know I never, I'm not proud of. I'm never proud of, and that's part of the reason why there was a divide here, but a divide in, North Clinton about this. But before, before bank, and always been banks around for a long time, but before banks like really came up, everybody, a lot of everything was, digital, as far as dealing with the banks and everything. Having a bank account was more vital, well, less vital back then. It was more vital now. You need a bank account. It's hard to, it's good to still have cash. It still works, but your life would be easier if you have a bank account or some sort of bank account, electronic way to move your money around. So back when migrants got paid, they always kept all their money. They always kept cash with them. They didn't have a bank account, nothing like that. So they always kept their cash with them. So, they used to, when they'll be out and about, maybe they'll be out drinking or they'll be out partying or whatever, and they'll end up getting robbed. They will end up getting robbed, and unfortunately, the assailant, had my skin color, which was very unfortunate. And I think that sort of like caused a divide between the black men mostly, and the Mexicans, and the Mexican men, because I never had any problem with nobody. I never had a problem with anybody. But when I go to Walmart and I see the men, they would never like associate it. Even if you try to look at them, say hi, some of them might say, you might some smile or whatever, but it would never like, maybe it's because of the language barrier, or the fact that they probably just told don't bother with them. They're known to rob you. You don't know who might rob you, so if you don't be friends with none of them, you won't let that in. So I understand that because of what was happening. So that's one reason that caused a divide to where I'm at. But like I said, through life, in life, the longer you live, you get knowledge. You gain knowledge. You become enlightened. You break through from that cocoon you lived in of information where it was limited and controlled by certain people. Now you moved out, you expand, you get to see and learn yourself without relying on a biased view of certain things in life. So me being able to get out and be around more a diverse group of people. I was able to see throughout my life that actually blacks and Mexicans are more alike than different, almost like we cousins. They say blacks and Italians are cousins. Like they share, we share certain similarities. So I think with blacks and Mexicans, I think more so, and it's sad because I think other people know that, and I think that's why they use that. And they try to put it. I think there's an intentional divide between us to keep us separated. Because if the black people and the Mexican people came together, they would be the majority, and they know that. So that's why they intentionally try to make the divide between us. And like you say, all they do, the playbook is, you know, look down on the black people. Look down on your black people. If you down with black, they're not. They're filthy, lazy. I even had my wife used to say that, certain members, in her family growing up saying that they just say, people didn't like the way we smell, or they thought we were, nasty or dirty and stuff like that without even knowing us, because it was going off the word of someone they heard, society, whatever. But when they finally met us, they realized that, hey, I actually love that person. I love how they move. I love how they are. I love the aura they have around them. So, it's come from, it come from ignorance. It come from lack of education, but that's happened. It happens. What can you do about it? You try to educate, and hopefully, people become enlightened, and, and drop that little bias, view. But like I said, especially with blacks and Mexicans, man, that's been with, I was married before to a Mexican woman, and she wasn't. It's gonna sound crazy, but it's real. She wasn't as Mexican as others. Now and then, we divorced, and I have a second Mexican wife, and this woman is 100% Mexicana, and she is, and like I said, she is, she helps me with. I'm trying to learn Spanish. Not. I'm just trying to learn so I can have a conversation. That's all I told her. That's my goal. I'm not trying to, I'm not trying to be no interpreter or do anything where I have to be bilingual. Nah, I just want to learn so I can have a conversation in Spanish, a real conversation, not just say a few words or stuff like that. So I'm working, trying to better myself. So even at 51, trying to learn a new language. But and I tell her this all the time. I'm like, black, we sort of similar because she like to know, do I like certain foods and stuff. And I always tell her yes, I like that. And when she make it, I'm like, that's sort of like that's sort of like something that we do. There's a lot of things. Start with with the food like Mexicans, they eat tortillas. Everything is tortilla. Everything. The flat round, either it's made out of flour or corn. It's either they go from small street taco size, small like that, and they grow. They got the big ones, so you can do the fajitas and burritos and stuff like that. And that's tortillas, all that. So the black people, our version of tortillas is bread, white bread, wheat bread, bread. We eat bread with everything. Bread, bread, biscuits, rolls, bread. We are, that's our tortilla. Another thing is salsa. You know, the one thing about Mexicans, y'all, they love salsa. Red salsa, green salsa. They love salsa on everything. They like it varies. Some of them now it varies. Some of them like mild, medium, or spicy, or hot. It all depends. That varies, but they love their salsa. And, we have our salsa too. It's called hot sauce. Most of us around the way was Texas Pete. And we didn't have no one thing. The difference is we didn't have no damn degrees of hotness with Texas Pete. It's one level of hot, and you had to adjust to it. Like Chris Ross said, he said he knew people they wouldn't leave out the damn door without it. I got my wallet, my keys, and my hot sauce. And I knew people that used to carry hot sauce with them in their pocket. I ain't never known a Mexican that carried down sauce in their pocket, but and then let's see, and they've got different, foods and stuff. We got tacos, we got different things, and one of the let's say, I was trying to think of similarities in food and stuff, and keep it simple. Like one of the main things one of the simple things that Mexicans eat or the tacos or the bean and cheese taco. You know, frijoles con queso taco. They're cheap. And they're good. Depends on if it's hot. Beans, you can't. It's hard not to cook. We love beans too. Black people beans. They love beans, and that's the one thing they beans. Pinto beans. They go with pinto beans, like refried pinto beans or black beans. And that's like the major beans with them. They got charro beans. They got different beans. Black people we got pinto beans, black eyed peas, lima beans, navy beans. All green beans. We eat beans too. So rice, beans, yes. But the thing is, I'll get back to the bean and cheese taco. The equivalent to that for the bean and cheese taco with black people is a bologna sandwich. That's why I say it's simple like a bologna sandwich, or something similar like a bologna sandwich, or a hot dog, or a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. That's what the bean and cheese taco is. So, and they have as far as drinking, they have black, Mexicans. They have the most famous, as you say, most famous is probably tequila. Tequila is very, popular within Mexican circles, and you go to a Mexican party, 9 times out of 10, there's some tequila there. Now black folks, it varies. Growing up, I grew up, it used to be gin. No, no, like matter of fact, I don't think we have like for some reason over the past decade or two, whatever, we adopted Hennessy. Maybe because the name is cool or something, but for some reason we adopted Hennessy as the black drink. And I've drunk Hennessy a few times in my life, not a lot. I can count on one hand. I'm not one of a big Hennessy fan. I'm more of a white liquor person. I drink brown liquor. No, I don't drink like when I was drinking. I have to make a correction because I don't drink like that no more. But I was drinking. I would drink brown liquor if it was there. Whatever. So, but if I had to go buy it, I would most likely buy white liquor like gin, tequila, you know, uh, vodka or something like that. Because I didn't like the aftertaste, the brown liquor in my throat. So, growing up, I seen family members drink. First one I seen them drink was damn Canadian Mist. Oh my God, I need some mist and coke. I heard that all the time. Canadian Mist, and then personally me, that's why I say people talking about music don't influence. Music does influence. And I grew up, as a teenager, all the teenagers we don't act, we drink. Sometimes we know we under 21, but hell, teenagers we drink. I ain't promoting it, but this just happened. It happened. And we drank, and you know what? The liquor I used to drink, Seagram's gin. You know where I got that from? Man, I got me some Seagram's gin. Everybody got the cup, but they can't sit. They ain't pitch in. That's where I got it from. Seagram's gin. Used to drink gin and juice. I never drunk. What else? I remember Ice Cube used to have was big on St. Ives. They had them cricket eye little drinks, flavored drinks. I just drink them because of Ice Cube. But yeah, we didn't drink. And they like people, and then like I remember that song by Pastor Cavassier, people drinking Cavassier and different stuff. But we don't have a unifying. I guess Hennessy is somewhat, but we don't have no liquor that is relevant to the. I mean, that is synonymous completely with the black community. I say Hennessy maybe is the closest. And then thinking about, and another way we got similarities is like partying, like we both, blacks, Mexicans, they love to party. They party, with the food, dancing, the music, and everything. It's just beautiful. But within that similarity, there are differences in that. So for instance, like their dance, like if black people, Mexicans, they'll dance. Oh my God, when that music come on, I don't care. They'll dance. They be on the dance floor. They have a bottle of damn Corona, a bottle of Modelo, some tequila, something. They be eating a damn taco, a damn chimichanga, a damn gordita, a torta, or something in their mouth, eating and dancing at the same time and won't miss a step. So they have a bag of nacho eating and dancing. I mean, I'm saying they'll do it. They'll be dancing. We don't do that. When it's time to eat, we ain't dancing. Period. 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 Many times I went to the damn some of the places, some of the we used to call some of the juke joints. I remember Club 421, the station, different places like that growing up. When it was time when they served them chicken sandwiches, them people you ain't see nobody out there on the dance floor with a damn chicken sandwich. They sat their ass down and ate. And then after they ate, there was a 50-50 chance they might not dance again. Cause you know why? That chicken might hit the bottom of their stomach, and then the places always had nasty bathrooms, so they had to be careful. They might not be on the dance floor because they afraid they might push something out. But yeah, Mexican, I don't care. They have a whole plate of food out there kicking. They be hearing that whole plate of food, listening to La Corona, no La Chona, La Jona. I said La Corona, La Chona. If y'all don't know what I'm talking about, you look it up on Spotify, wherever you listen to music. Put in La Chona and hear that song, and tell you that song come on care. They dancing. But we can be like that sometimes. We do the line dancing. Yeah, I've seen people. It depends on what the line dance is. Something simple and stuff. You see people out with their drinks out here drinking stuff. But that line dance is too intense. They're not. No, they're not gonna be out there with no drink. They ain't gonna spill it. They pay too much money for that damn drink to be spilling it or doing the damn Cupid shuffle. So yeah. Oh my God. Another thing. Now here's just one thing. Here's one thing that's similar that goes personal, and I know for everybody. I know, but Eddie Murphy talked about this growing up. He talked about this in one of his stand-ups. I think it was Delirious. He was talking about his mother like to throw shoes. And he said he had that shoe throwing mother. She was like Clint Eastwood with it. He was like, "Why'd you eat the ice cream off the floor?" Mama, it wasn't that bad. I'm saying, but yeah, there were mothers that had people out here that throw shoes and stuff like that. And in the basically the black community, you have mothers that throw that damn shoe or knock you upside your head. Or they'll smack you with the shoe if you ain't acting right. And we had that, in the black community. The mass community, they're known for that. If you talk to them, they'll talk about their abuela or whatever, and they don't act right in front of her. First thing she's gonna do, she's gonna take that chancla off. And for y'all don't know, chancla is like a flip flop or whatever, a chancla, a sandal or something. That's what they call it. It should take that chancla off, and I don't give a damn how big you is. She'll beat you upside the head. Throw that thing and hit you dead in your head. Yes, I done seen it. Take that shoe, take that shoe off and be ready. Yeah, so that reminds, yeah, I'm telling when I see him do that, that reminds me. Yes, and one of the main things that's that is like the similarity, and this is like big. To me, this is big. This is one thing that makes us both like one of the main things that makes us both like similar as far as lifestyles and personalities a little bit like that. That the head of like when you got your families and stuff, and most of the time like the matriarch, the head of the family, you figure it's the man. Right now, most of the time it's the abuela. The abuela is the damn head of the house. Everybody looks up. When they go to somebody's house. Everybody having a meeting. Where they gonna meet at? At abuela's house, wherever she's at. Everybody go to abuela's house, and we have that grandma. And so abuela's grandmother. So we have it. Everybody go to Nana's house. Everybody go to Gma's house. Everybody go to Big Mama's house. Everybody go to and she is the most of the time she have a husband. She have a grandfather. Has a grandfather there, but he just sitting back and relaxing. Most of the time, is Big Mama, abuela. They are running things. They're running things, and everything goes to them. So that right there is one of the main things that this family structure, as far as the matriarchs and how the hierarchy and stuff. That's one of the things that makes us like a whole like very similar. And and another thing that makes us similar, which is not, I don't think it's good. Well, whatever. It depends on what perspective you're looking at. One of the things that that makes us similar, that we both have sections of our people that want to align themselves with Caucasian people. Period. I'm not saying that to say something like is wrong with having doing that, being aligned, like trying to having Caucasian friends or trying to achieve some sort of stat, whatever. I'm not sitting up here knocking you for that, but when you do that at the expense of losing your identity, who you are, that's a problem. If you want to be around, if you want to be around a certain type of people, you want to hang around with, that's fine. as long as you don't forget who you are when you leave those people, that you still that person. I don't matter. It don't matter how much they hype you up and stuff. They don't. When you leave there, you still who you are, and people sometimes forget who they are when they're trying to align themselves or trying to achieve a certain thing or get the respect or the admiration of white people. They sometimes lose themselves, and that could be an issue. You know. And this religiously, it's not. You know, I was, I don't. I'm not 100% sure. Like the people I've spoken to, like Mexicans, they're big on like the Catholic culture. A lot of them grew up in Catholic. Getting baptized and everything. Black us, we don't. Us, we got a serious. We have a complex. But it ain't that complex. Relation with religion. So we we simply in this country, for when we came here, like I said, we were stripped of religion, so we didn't have, we were disconnected or detached from our the religion that our people, followed and what we did. We were taught this watered down, you know, chopped up, copied and pasted together version of a religion and called it Christianity. And you know, we took a symbol. It's not even a symbol. We took a symbol of, the Savior. We took a symbol of a man, Jesus Christ, and they took another person, like a French person, and took his face and made it into the symbol of a Savior. Jesus, like he was supposed to be, he's the Son of God. He's the Son of God and everything. Jesus Christ, and they used the symbol of a French man. I wonder how that went. You want, hey man, you Jesus, and they just started painting pictures of him, and all of a sudden he was projected as Jesus. When the Bible says that he looks entirely different, that he looks, even how can you follow you say you follow the word of a book word for word, but the word clearly states that a person looks a certain way, but you trying to tell people with this picture that he looks another way. So that's, and we as a people, I think that has really crippled us as far as not being true to our identity and trying to, you know I don't know, try to appeal to something that somebody else tells you, like instead of you in your own mind looking and having common sense. You don't want to go against the grain because you're afraid that that might affect you, or as far as your job, or certain people might not like you, so you might lose your check, you might lose your way of living and stuff. So, you know, like I said, we have a complex relationship with religion, and that's some of the but like I said, we can't be completely alike with everything, but we do have, like I said, we do have a lot of similarities. And I'll say all this to say that if we would come together, stop looking at each other as different, just come together, man. Look at each other as everybody would just drop the stereotypes or the things that have been fed to you by either media or unenlightened people to get you to hate these people. If you would just drop that and everybody give each other a chance, you understand. You might realize. I'm talking about my black brothers and sisters, and I'm talking about my Mexican brothers and sisters. If y'all just look at each other and stop, and get to just have a conversation, you'll realize you have more similarities than differences. And that's one thing that will help as far as in society, as far as dealing with this immigration, all this crazy stuff with the government, man. We can, people will come together and stop looking at our differences and look at what we have alike, what things that we have in common. We would, we wouldn't be in this mess what we in. We could, move forward and stuff. But as long as we keep listening to other people tell us that you don't like this person because of their skin color, we still gonna be having. We gonna still. It's always gonna. You know, I ain't gonna say it's always. I'm correct. I ain't say it's always gonna be like that, but it's gonna take a lot longer for things to change in the way that things should change. But we'll see. We will see. But yeah, like I said, that's we are we are more and like I said, as far as music is concerned, yes, hip hop, black hip hop has sort of changed a little bit now. So, but we have hip hop, stuff. I think they when I first heard this, I first seen the word, I thought it was something different. I think the type of music I think it's called reggaeton. When I first saw it, I didn't hear, I didn't care about the last three letters, ton. I just cared about the first letters, reggae. I said, "What the hell is reggae music?" And when I first put it on, I said, "This ain't no damn reggae." But then I realized that was a genre of music. So yes, they have reggaeton. They have we have our hip hop artists. I ain't gonna name them. We all know our hip hop artists. They have their artists. You have of course, you got the Bad Bunny, probably the most popular star in the world. You have your things, Osuna, J Balvin, a couple other ones. So it's just I think one of them, Alejandro Rahul or something. They have their different ones. And I listen to them, and they're they yeah. As long as it has a funky beat, a nice hook, I can deal with sometimes I don't understand everything they're saying, but it don't matter. That beat is right, and sometimes it's not even about understanding what they're saying. It's about how the sound of their voice, complements the beat and the music. Sometimes the only thing I heard saying something stupid, so it's just, like I said, it's just, like I said, a lot more similarities than differences. A lot more similarities, you know. And me and my wife, we, recognize our similarities and we recognize our differences. And sometimes our differences make our similarities that much better, So we, appreciate things that we can, bond over or agree over, and things we don't agree with. We just sometimes we agree to disagree. We just have discussions and just we ain't agree with everything. Everybody's a human. Everybody's not gonna agree with everything that everybody say. So just like I said, we work through it. That's what's being in a relationship is about. You know, when things aren't right. Things aren't when things aren't always when the waters are rough. We batten down the hatches. Shiver me timbers. We make it work. For real. It's enough of that. You know, I just wanted to get on, talk about that because I told my man I was going to discuss it. He wanted me to discuss it, talk about, but we talk about it, and and he agreed with me. And I tell him, he said, "I know you'll see. You got a beautiful Mexican queen, so I know what's." You can see some of the differences and the similarities. I said, yeah, I see it all the time. I see it all the time. You know, Another thing people don't talk about. Here's another thing. The last thing I talk about. They have a food, menudo. Menudo is a Mexican version of chitlins, and it is. If you don't know, you know. If you don't know, now you know. Menudo is a Mexican. Not, it was funny. The first time I heard of the dish menudo, I laughed because every time we hear about menudo, anybody who's my age, around 50s, around in the late early 50s, no, around the early 50s or mid 50s or late 40s, if you think of the word menudo, what do you think about? A damn group, a little boy band Spanish group back in the days, menudo. And I think it produced. Like I said, I don't like using Google, but let me use my brain. If I'm not mistaken, did Menudo produce Ricky Martin? It produced somebody. But yes, Menudo, the group. Now Menudo is a food. Actually, pretty good. My wife taught me how to make it. It's pretty good. But yeah, and like I said, if I had trying to think of other dishes that are like similar, but they chicharrones. Chicharrones are pork skins. I love pork rinds. I eat pork rinds. I know a lot of my grew up with a lot of black folks eat pork rinds, so they eat them too. Chicharrones, and they're yes, and they eat. How we in North Carolina, how we you eat a you cook a pig. However you cook it, you cook it on the grill. However you cook it, and you just chop it up. Um, and we're I forgot. They call it Kanye. Kanye, Carne. I can't roll my tongue like the Spanish people, so I can't say it the way they say it. But it's Kanye or something like not Kanye like Kanye West. It's Kanye. So it's like they take the meat, chop it up, and they serve it. They ain't not like us is putting like barbecue sauce and everything on it. But I mean, you have that option. You have salsa. They put salsa on everything, like I told you before. But they have different things you can put on it. But yeah, we have that too. We have chop. They call it now. They call it pulled pork everywhere, and I'm never calling it pulled pork. I grew up in Southeast North Carolina. We call it barbecue. Around everywhere else. Barbecue is just anything you cook on a grill and put barbecue sauce on. That's barbecue. The barbecue we call put it this way, what we call a cookout, they call a barbecue. So so that's just a regional thing, but that's some like I said, that's some of the things that we are similar. We have similar together. Like I said, there's a lot of things we have. There's a few things we have, that are different. But I feel like our similarities bring us together more than our differences tear us apart. And hopefully, through as time goes on, we will see these similarities, and hopefully we can come together because that'll be two beautiful communities coming together. And Lord have mercy, man. Have Juneteenth merged with Cinco de Mayo. Lord have mercy. Boy, that'd be the biggest party ever. Sound like Cat Will. Lord, that'll be the biggest party in the history of niggerdom. Oh, for real. with with that being said, I would like to thank y'all for being with me today. As I always say, kiss your kids, kiss your loved ones, because you never know, it might be the last. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. As I always say, kiss your kids, kiss your loved ones, because you never know. You never know. We might not get that chance. Tell them how you feel. Tell them for real. Tell them how you feel. Tell them, you love them. Tell them because keep waiting till the right moment. The right moment might never come. Every moment is the right moment. So you get that chance, do that. That being said, I love every one of y'all for joining with me today. And have a great weekend. I will see y'all Monday. Try to stay cool, stay hydrated, eat, don't eat too much, drink water. Have a nice weekend. I love you.